Yes, who's back? It is Awesemo MLB Live Before Lock. Not done yet. My final show of the day. Anybody who stuck around for the channel throughout the day, you must enjoy me. If you don't enjoy me, this has been a terrible day for you because this is the fourth piece of content that I'm doing on the YouTube channel today. I have not stopped talking basically since I woke up this morning. But I get to talk to a fresh face now. That's been the one thing that's been nice about all my content today. Working with different people all the time. And today, I get to work with Terry. It's been a minute since Terry and I did a show together. So, Terry, how's your weekend going?
Going pretty well, man. It was a fun night last night. Stayed out a little too late. Woke up a little too late this morning. A little banged up, but yeah, doing good. It's, got my head into the baseball slate in the early afternoon. Wrote up my article, so I'm good to go. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Also, one thing also is people who just watched the MMA show are pointing out. Yes, I just finished doing the MMA show about 5 minutes ago, and now I'm right on to do MLB. One thing that helped is I did do the strategy show this morning with Adam, so I was able to do the preparation a little bit earlier, and then also refreshing, some of the ownership here. It's kind of the same. Like a lot of the teams that looked like good leverage stacks are still looking like good leverage stacks. It's still a good spot for Lance Lynn. It's not like he's all of a sudden in a bad spot. The Cubs were always going to be a good matchup. So it's not like anything has really substantially changed from this morning that's making me really rethink anything that I was on earlier in the day. But let's start with Lance Lynn, who is clearly the top overall player on the slate, just in terms of what we're expecting from him out of safety. Cash games, you have to play Lance Lynn. It's very rare there's somebody I would consider a must play in cash game. Lance Lynn is that guy today. But I'm going to ask you, for tournament purposes, he's currently projected to be in 54.5% of lineups on DK. Over on FanDuel, 28.2%. So from a tournament standpoint, how are you going to approach Lance Lynn tonight?
I still want him. I still want a good amount of him. I don't know that I'm going to be approaching those numbers just because it's fairly rare that I'm going to get up to that kind of a number on any individual pitcher on the FanDuel slate. 30% is a lot for me. So if I'm undercutting that to, like the 18 to 20 range, that's around my upper level of comfort for most pitcher shares anyway, unless it's one of these short slates or one of these slates where it's just one dominant guy. And I think on this slate in particular, we've got a pretty wide mid-range. There's a lot of reasonably talented pitchers on this slate. It's not an ace-loaded slate, but it's a slate with a few decent pitchers on it, and several of whom are also in really good spots that are honestly comparable to this one against the Cubbies. So I love Lance Lynn in this spot, and I love the situation for him. But yeah, for tournaments, I think it's just a little tricky, a little tough to build unique lineups between his price tag on FanDuel and then that ownership. On DK, the 9,600 is a little bit more workable in terms of the salary, but the ownership up above 50%, you're dealing with the same thing where you're going to be walking into just a lot of pitching shares. So great spot, absolutely lock and load for cash games. Tournament play, I'm going to be trying to undercut and spread out some of those shares of some of these other guys.
Yeah, I'm going the opposite way. I'm going to go lower. I'm going to be going with lower owned offenses and then pitching. I'm just loading up on Lance Lynn. To me, I just find him to be so safe on this slate. And there's so few pitching plays that I really love today that to me, it's like, you know what? He's chalk. I'm riding with it. I'm going to differentiate elsewhere. The other thing that's really a selling point for me, the price point, particularly on DK, is just wrong. 9,600 for Lance Lynn. He should be more expensive. Even on FanDuel at 10,400. A little more substantial, but he should be more expensive considering the matchup against the Cubs. This team yesterday aside, where they went out and scored a whole bunch of runs, that was against Dallas Keuchel. This is such a bad offense. It's nothing but replacement level players at this point. So I'm gonna take the safety that comes with Lance Lynn combined with the upside and the incorrect price tag. I'm gonna run with it. I'll differentiate elsewhere. Now I'm going to ask you, if you are looking to undercut the field on Lance Lynn, who is it in this upper tier of the pricing range that you're looking to get to instead?
So let me jump over to the top pitchers tool. This is what I usually like to look at while I'm answering this kind of a question. And I just want to see, I'm looking for the ownership, the leverage section. So there's two pitchers that I like in a vacuum in that San Francisco-Atlanta game. I just hate the two teams that they're going to be pitching against, dueling one another. And that's in Oscar Ynoa and Logan Webb. I think both those guys are pretty talented pitchers. Like I said, I don't love throwing them against those offenses. But at price and at ownership, they're both going off at like significantly higher probability of success than what their ownership shares. Noah's going off like twice as much, And then you get Logan Webb like 4 times as much, 3.5 times as much. So there's a lot of leverage there. There's a lot of room to work with those guys. I think Wainwright's in a great spot. He's going off around even leverage, going up against the Pirates there. Maybe not a huge strikeout upside spot for him by any means, but a very, very safe pitcher in a very, very safe situation. I think you can get a lot out of Framber Valdez on this slate, although he's a little bit overowned compared to his probability of success. You've got basically all those guys I just named off the top starters tool here, and I'll throw Marcus Strowman into the mix as well because he's on that list and in that tier as well. Even though I don't love going to Strowman for DFS purposes, I think he belongs there. And all those guys are ranked almost exactly the same in terms of their probability of success, with Lance Lynn a few points out ahead of them. So when you get a big group like that and there's short ownership on a few of those guys, I'm happy to spread out some shares across those guys. So that's really where I'm going to be looking, is just to juice some of the lower owned spots there, grab some position on the field. Strowman's tough because he's going off 3 times as owned as his probability of success because he's a $9,300 starter on FanDuel. I'd rather have some Wainwright. I'd rather take the risk with Logan Webb, with Huascar Ynoa. I think those guys are generally better for fantasy anyway. Strowman's just tough to trust, even though that's a great spot as well going up against Washington. But just with all that ownership on it, I don't trust Strowman. So I would knock him a peg down behind those other guys. Outside of that tier, though, I'm not really looking too much into the John Grays, Michael Wakas, Alec Millses of the world. I think those guys are another couple notches down.
There, we got a whole show to do. You don't have to rattle off every pitcher at once. You can have us in and out of here. Just be like, yeah, I like this pitcher, don't like this guy, I like this guy, don't like that guy. We've got an hour to fill here. We can't do the whole show in 3 minutes, but
giving you some framework.
Yeah, Marcus Strowman, my least favorite play on the entire slate, and it's relative to the amount that the field is getting to him. I just don't get it. And I understand the spot, right? I understand it's a great spot against the Washington Nationals. If it was not for the amount of ownership he had on the field, I would be on him a little bit, just because the matchup against Washington, really bad offense outside of Josh Bell and Juan Soto. But he doesn't have strikeout upside, and he's 42. He's going to be 42% of lineups on ZK. On FanDuel, like you just said, he's also massively popular, ended at $9,300 price tag. So I'm going to ask you legitimately, what is the upside of Marcus Strowman? He's clearly picking up too much ownership, but what do you think are really significant chances of being in the optimal lineup? Because he doesn't generate many strikeouts.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be just more a spot about getting some depth out of the guy and just getting a game where he just completely suppresses the other team. Maybe he picks up a few additional strikeouts here. Nationals are sitting 23.4% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching, so right around the middle of the league. Everything else way below average, 2.75% home run rate, a 133 ISO, create runs 14% worse than average by WRC plus against right-handed pitching. So there's plenty of room for Strowman to have an effective start here. But yeah, like you're saying, there's not a ton of strikeout upside for him, 21.9% on the year over 145 and 2/3 innings. We've got a large enough sample, enough career experience with Marcus Strowman to know that that's about who he is. So I don't really see a ton of upside. I see more safety here. I don't think he's going to go rocketing through the roof. And with that much ownership, you really want somebody who's going to go rocketing through the roof, much more like Lance Lynn is likely to do here. So I would prefer Lynn if we're deciding between the two heaviest owned pitchers. And that's a strong preference. I think he's a better pitcher, much more strikeout upside, better matchup even than this one against the lousy Nationals. So yeah, everything points to Lance Lynn if you're just talking about two highly owned pitchers going heads up there.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's also one of the reasons that I don't really have an issue with getting to Lance Lynn in a massive amount of my lineups. I'm just going to take that Marcus Strowman ownership. I'm just giving it to Lance Lynn. And I'm going to say okay, the field you're playing Marcus Strowman this heavy. I'm just going to go overweight to the field on Lance Lynn. Play your Marcus Strowman. And it's crazy to me. We're all everybody's looking at this slate is going to say Lance Lynn by far the best play. He's only marginally more popular than Marcus Strowman. 54% versus 42% ownership on DK. On FanDuel, 28% to 26%. These guys are very comparable in the amount of lineups they're ending in. And I don't agree with it. I think Lance Lynn is a far superior play. Maybe it ultimately comes out the slate starts and the ownership is different than what we have projected. But as the numbers currently stand, I can't reasonably get to Marcus Strowman despite the matchup. I'd much rather get to guys like you mentioned, Framber Valdez, Logan Webb, Adam Wainwright. To me, those are all superior plays. But now I'm going to ask you from a cash game perspective, which two pitchers on DK do you think you're most likely to land on? FanDuel, Lance Lynn, no-brainer. DK, SP1, Lance Lynn, no-brainer. What about the second option?
Let me get over here and check out some of these prices. I mean, just on a price perspective, if we're talking cash, I don't know that we want to build in the risk of going to Huascar Ynoa, But out of that tier, he's the friendliest price. He kind of makes the most sense to me. I don't want to price myself into looking at guys like John Means, Stephen Brault, guys that are similarly priced, Adrian Hauser. These are not the same caliber pitchers, so it's a tough spot. There are certainly strikeouts in that lineup for Inoa, though, so I think he could have an effective enough start. So if we're just looking for like a price play for something like that, then I think he makes some sense. I think I'd rather book a little bit more safety alongside Lynn, though. So is it $8,900 Strowman? Probably not. It's probably, for me, $9,200 Adam Wainwright. So we're going 92, 96, double spend up at pitcher, and then we're looking for some cheap bats if we're doing it that way. Otherwise, I think in the affordable pitching side of things, it's probably, for me, going to be Inoa if we're going cheap.
Yeah, it's I'm going to say for me, it is Wainwright as well. For tournaments, I really like Inoa today. Also, you mentioned Logan Webb, two guys that I think really make sense to get overweight to. Logan Webb right now on ZK, 6% projected ownership, 15%. Over on FanDuel, we've got just 4.9% to Inoa, and Logan Webb only at 2.6%. Two guys I definitely want to be overweight to in tournaments. For cash games, I like the safety that Adam Wainwright brings to the table. Not the highest strikeout rate in the world, but a little bit more apt to the strikeout pitcher in the market. Strowman also, I love the matchup against the Pittsburgh Pirates. So Adam Wainwright, to me, I kind of think the ownership between him and Strowman should be flipped. I think that would be more appropriate for this slate. However, that's not what the field is doing. So give me Wainwright at a pretty substantial rate on this slate over somebody like Marcus Strowman. And even for cash games, with Strowman being popular, I still prefer Wainwright. I like Wainwright a little bit better as a fantasy pitcher. Moving down
and on the slate too, just real quick, sorry to jump in on like that. On the FanDuel slate too, Waino's priced up a little bit at 99, so he's even lower owned over there, under 10% ownership in our last projection. So I love that spot on FanDuel. I really want to get to him a good amount. And he's a pitcher that we've won with in the past. I think he's been in the league long enough. Everybody's probably won with him, but he's a guy I've gone to for years and years. And yeah, 22.9% strikeout. It's not spectacular, but it's better than where Strowman is. And he's in a very, very strong matchup, like you said, going up against the Pirates. And the Pirates are at a 23.5% strikeout rate. So that's 0.1 of a percentage point worse than the Nationals are. So they're right there. It's essentially the same matchup for him and Strowman. So just give me the much lower owned guy who strikes out more hitters, who I trust more, or who I think is more talented.
Let's talk about some of these cheaper starting pitchers now. And this is where I think it starts to get pretty dicey, particularly on DraftKings. FanDuel, I don't think there's any need to go to any of these cheaper starting pitchers. So we'll start just with that as a preface of a talking point. Would you agree with that? There's no need to go dumpster diving on FanDuel.
I absolutely would. Yeah. On this slate, I just don't see it. Between the selections, the matchups, there's just nobody there that I want to get to. And I'm somebody who will particularly, a lot of the time, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to hold my nose and roster some of these lesser pitchers if they're in good spots. And we just don't have that option today. So yeah, it cuts off pretty high up the board for me today.
So for FanDuel, the cheapest pitcher I'd roster personally is Yuscar at 8,600. I don't want to get down to the John Means, the Michael Wacha, John Gray range, at least not on FanDuel. DK, John Means kind of becomes an interesting pitching option because there are going to be lineups if you're rostering expensive staff. You're going to need to save salary. John Means only 7,200 on DK, single digit ownership on this slate. I don't feel good about him against the Rays, and I do think the Rays are a pretty good upside spot. Although a lot of that is because of the Baltimore bullpen, not necessarily because of John Means himself. But this was a talking point that Adam and I had this morning on the strategy show. John Means, very good the first half of the season. Second half of the season, deals with a shoulder injury, spends some time on the injured list, works himself back. Now no longer a pitch count. Hasn't been terrible, but he struggled a little bit in the second half. Do you think John Means from the first half of the season or the second half of the season is more the guy that we should expect going forward?
I think we should expect a worse pitcher than we've even seen so far. I think John Means is one of the luckiest pitchers in baseball when he's on. That first half that he had was fueled by a sub-Mendoza batting average on balls in play for opposing hitters. So, I mean, part of that is skill. Certainly there is a skill in inducing weak contact, inducing ground balls, but it was to too much of a degree. It wasn't skill-based. There was a lot of luck and happenstance baked in there for him. I think John Means is much more the pitcher that we're seeing now. I think he's actually, like I said, a little bit worse than that. So I don't know that I want to go to it, but I think it does make sense just given the $7,200 price tag. That's a very workable price. He is probably, out of that grouping of pitchers, one of the more talented, or at least has some more upside than some of the other guys. It's not wholly there in the numbers. The strikeout rate, 22.9%, comps with what Waino does. So you're putting a not hefty strikeout rate. Like if he was a 28% strikeout rate guy and then had, some issues with barreled balls like he does, 10.6% barreled balls and a 4.44 xFIP. If he was striking out more guys, I'd be more comfy with it. 27.8% CSW, doesn't throw enough strikes. So I don't love him here. He's going up against the Rays, who are worse against left-handed pitching. They are still a decent offense, create runs 5% better than average, but they've got a 24.5% strikeout rate, 165 ISO, and a 3.56% home run rate, all of which are below average. So if you're going to start somebody against the Rays, I guess this is, maybe a spot to do it. I don't love it, though. I actually wrote up the Rays this afternoon as my featured stack. I'm getting very nice home run numbers on those guys. So that's a spot that I'm looking more to the bat side of things. And I actually don't think the Rays, outside of the few key hitters, are owned enough in this spot. So, price-wise, it works for DK tournaments, but it's not a comfy situation by any means.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that this is why it kind of becomes an interesting talking point for DK. And luckily, if you play on FanDuel, you don't even have to worry about this because you don't need to save salary at pitcher on FanDuel. But on DK, a lot of lineups are going to need that cheap SP2. So I'm going to ask you, somebody's holding Tyler hostage right now, and for whatever reason you want to save him, like for the purpose of this experiment, this situation, you want to save Tyler. Which pitcher under 8K? This is what the guy who's holding him captive says. He needs you to tell him which roster under 8K is the best play on DK today. Tyler's life is on the line. Who are you picking? Who do you feel safest with?
Oh God, sorry, Ty. I think that rope's getting cut and you're getting dropped into the volcano, buddy. I don't want to say Michael Wacha in that situation, but I think maybe he kind of makes some sense here. He's relatively highly ranked on Alex's board. He's got a positive leverage situation. He's going up against the Orioles, so it's not the best matchup in the league, but certainly not the worst matchup on the board either. Baltimore, 24.5% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching, 1% below average creating runs, a plus 3.68% home run rate, a plus 171 ISO. So they're a little bit above average in terms of the power, a little bit below in terms of the run creation, a little bit below average in terms of their strikeouts. I don't like it. I don't trust it. But I think there's more on the bone for Wacha here than for Means here, just because of the matchup, just because of who he's going up against. I don't love either spot, though, but you're not giving me a ton to work with here in terms of that question. I mean, we're also other guys in that range are like David Price, John Gray going up against the Dodgers, Sean Nolan. Like, there's not a lot to choose from here. So I think I'm just going to grab the other side of this game and say Michael Wacha with it.
Yeah, I kind of like the scenario because it seems like no matter who you choice, whoever your choice is, Tyler ends up dying at the end. There's no safe choice here. It's all a disaster. But that's also why some of these guys, it's like, hey, Michael Wacha, John Means. My answer I actually think is David Price in terms of who I'd feel the safest with, just because David Price is a pitcher who, he's not what he used to be, but he's still serviceable. The matchup against the Rockies is terrific. The obvious issue with David Price is just how deep is he going into the game? The Rockies have said that they want to get David Price stretched out. It hasn't happened yet. I still think it's going to happen at some point. I don't know if tonight is going to be the night, but given the state of the other guys in this price range, I'll roll the dice with David Price. 3.82 ERA, 3.81 expected ERA. The strikeout stuff from not great, 19.5%, but it's the Rockies on the road. He's fairly likely to pick up the win bonus. He was able to make it through 5 innings. And like I said, there is the chance that they say, hey, today's the day David Price throws 75, 80 pitches. So I'm going to be looking at David Price in this cheap price range. I don't feel good about it because I don't know how deep he's going in the game. I don't know how many pitches he's going to throw. But just on the chance we see the uptick in pitches and the matchup, I like David Price. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, it does based on, he's a guy that we've seen. We know he's a talented guy. Still, the innings really, really concern me. But yeah, you are making that play in just, I'm hoping that I get 5-6 innings out of him, a handful of strikeouts. For the price, that makes sense. There's nothing wrong with it from a price perspective. Other things that concern me about it a little bit, 63 2/3 this year, 19.5% strikeout rate for Price. So the Ks are way down. That's one of the lower numbers on the board from this lousy slate that we have to choose from. Like even John Gray on the other side, 23.2. We read off a couple in the 22s with Waino and Strowman. So there's not a ton of Ks there. And the other thing that I'm looking at, the active Colorado roster, if we're looking at season long for the active roster, 181 ISO, 21% strikeout rate, 394 home run rate, 3.94% home run rate. Now, some of this is based on some small sample guys creeping their way into this current roster, and they're 4% below average creating runs. But a 21% strikeout rate and a 181 ISO, those really, I don't know that we want to ignore those fully. And there are a few guys in here. I mean, you're looking at Connor Joe under 20% strikeouts, Brendan Rodgers under 20%, Charlie Blackmon an excellent 12.3% hitting cleanup. Even the bad hitters are in the low 20s, except for Ryan McMahon, who's at 26% strikeouts. So there are some there, but it's maybe not as easy a lineup to strike out as we might be thinking. And it's actually surprising me as I was looking at it. So that would make me a little bit hesitant, but I think the price is right. And I think you could, I just realized what I said there. I think the cost is correct for Mr. Price. So I think you can get away with it.
There you go. That's the name of the show. If we were labeling our shows, like it was a strategy show and it had a long-standing thing, we had to label this show as something on like a podcast, whatever. The Price is right. It would have to be the name of this one. And that's really what it comes down to me. It has nothing to do with me looking at David Price and be like, oh, I think this is just a terrific spot for him. Although, I mean, that is part of it. It's a good spot against the Rockies, but it just look at the other options around him that we're comparing him to. And I just feel marginally better about him than Michael Wacha, John Means, John Gray. Once again, that's not a huge vote of confidence. It's just saying I think he sucks less than the sucky guys who are around him.
Right. Absolutely. And it's that kind of slate. Your SP2, unless you're paying up double, your SP2 is going to come from that kind of a group where you're choosing the least sucky out of a bunch of sucky options. It's just that kind of day. So yeah, I'm with you.
All right. Well, I've just been, he's still in our data. Somebody just said that David Price isn't pitching anymore today. Oh. Is that the case?
I had not heard that. In that case, don't roster him, everybody. Oh yeah, look at that. Corey Knievel popped in there.
Yeah, David Price is still pitching though. Really? At least per reports right now. Here is the report. David Visay of LA Sports Radio said that Knievel will open and that David Price will follow him as the long reliever. That's okay. That doesn't make a difference to me because David Price, we're not expecting David Price to go out and throw 9 innings, 8 innings anyway. So considering the pitch count is the concern for him, if anything, and now, by the way, this is also maybe me trying to, make a case for someone who I've already decided I like a little bit for this slate. David Price, if we weren't sure we were going to get 5 innings out of him, doesn't matter now. He's going to qualify for the win as soon as he comes in. So you can make a case that that's more favorable for him. The other thing to consider too, he doesn't have to face the top of the order. This is one time he gets to skip the top of the order. So I understand that people might look at this and be like, oh no, Knievel, Price. I think this is a better spot for Price now.
Yeah, I think that's apt, perfectly apt. And the fact that you don't have to worry about the quality start on DraftKings, so you can take that out of here. We're not talking about him as a FanDuel play, guys. It's just a DraftKings play. So, yeah, I think that actually gives them a little bit of a boost, like you said, with being able to qualify for the win. And they're going to be able to manage directly those innings and like what he matches up with when they bring him into the game. So you get a few lower leverage at bats, hopefully, a few lower leverage plate appearances, hopefully, to start with. Cruises through the first 2 and then maybe gives you 3 more, you get to your 5 innings. So yeah, I actually like it better now that he's following.
Yeah. And once again, it's still a thing where maybe we need a little more information, just more confirmation that David Price is going to be pitching, but all reports indicate he's going to be the long reliever today. It's just Corey Knievel opening, and that's not anything that's really going to change my outlook here. If anybody has any questions about the pitchers, throw those in. If not, I'm going to ask you, Terry, any other pitchers we've not mentioned you want to discuss? I feel like we have kind of beat all these crappy options to death.
Yeah, I think we covered anybody that I really want to get into. There are name recognition. Like John Gray's been around long enough that he's got some name recognition, but he's not good. He's going up against the Dodgers. He's a league average pitcher. I shouldn't say he's not good. He's a league average pitcher, but throwing him up against this Dodgers lineup that's now essentially fully healthy and just loaded from top to bottom, it's just not a good spot. I don't really even care that he's at a great price. I just think he's going to get tattooed here. So I don't think you get any upside out of that. I have no desire to go to like Adrian Hauser, Sean Nolan, Colby Allard. I think is going to get destroyed by the Astros. So yeah, it's a really short pitching slate for me.
All right. Now, before we move on, I'm going to bring up our MLB player props tool. I'm going to give out the overall top bet in our player prop model. But guys, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because that's what allows us to give out some of this content for free. Then I'm just going to get your reaction, what you think of these. And I'm just kind of also trying to sort this in my head and try to figure out, all right, which guys have played already earlier and which guys are on the slate for tonight. All right, we're going to like this. The number 1 prop bet of the night in our player prop model tonight, Terry, is Yuskar Yanoa for over 5.5 strikeouts. I'll also add that this is a plus money bet, plus 112. So 28% expected ROI. So keep in mind, over 5.5 strikeouts at plus money. If you guys want to find where you can get the best value on any bets, head on over to OddsShopper.awesemo.com, because some books might have this as like minus 105. Some might have it minus 120. You want to get the best price out there that we could find easily with OddsShopper, plus 112. is the best odds on the board. So Yuscar Ynoa plus money over 5.5 strikeouts. What do you think of that number?
I tell you, that's a sharp line. I've got him projected for 5.47 strikeouts, the way that my model comes together. So I've got him right at that 5.5 mark. I think he creeps over it. If I was making the bet, I think I'd take it for the over. I think he creeps over it in that spot. Just a good pitcher, good strikeout acumen for him. And going up against the Giants team, 24.9% strikeout rate on the season against right-handed pitching. So I think it's there for him.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, to consider here is it's a plus money bet. So it's something that actually, if you look in our model, we have it slightly more likely to hit the over than the under, not by a significant rate, but it's the plus money that really makes it a positive ROI bet. That's where it comes in handy here. That's what really makes it rate out well. And by the way, another guy in this game that we kind of liked a little bit, Logan Webb, we have him also plus money bet over 5.5 strikeouts. Not quite the same ROI expected on the Yuscar Ynoa one, but Logan Webb plus money over 5.5 strikeouts. What do you make of that number?
That one I've got under. That one I've got at 4.21 is his strikeout total in my model here. So I've got him going well under. Similar strikeout rate for the Braves, though, on the other side, 24.2% strikeout rate for the team for the active roster against right-handed pitching. So I just I get him coming up a little bit short on that one, but I can't really point my finger to exactly what would create it.
All right, fair enough. Moving on to the offenses now, because these pitchers, yuck. I don't want to talk about these dudes anymore. Let's talk about some of the bats that get to pick on these crappy pitchers that we already talked about. And I think where we have to start talking with the offense, let me just refresh our top stacks tool to make sure I have the freshest ownership updates in front of me, is let's touch on the Milwaukee Brewers and what we want to do with this team today. It is a fantastic spot for them against Charlie Burns, with 22.2% projected ownership on DK for the Brewers. Over on FanDuel, 18.2%. Clearly a terrific matchup, but everybody's getting to Milwaukee. What are you going to do with them?
Yeah, it's tricky. They've burned me like every time, no matter which direction I've gone. They score when I don't have them. They don't score when I do have them. I talk shit about them and they do well. So it's just, I'm not really sure, but I'm going with it. I'm going with the ownership play again. I want to be away from bats that are this heavily owned in any situation. Even with a lousy pitcher on the mound, even in a good matchup, if I can pick my way to a few lower owned guys like Lorenzo Cain, maybe stands out for 2,900 at 7% ownership on FanDuel, that's 18% on DK. So he doesn't even work on DK. But on FanDuel, maybe if I'm grabbing like a one-off, a guy like that, or trying to stack and building in a few guys from the back end of the lineup, that's how I'd approach it. But for me, this would be an undercut for sure. I'd be well under the field's mark on the Brewers here. I do like the upside. They have a few hitters that excel against left-handed pitching. We don't have much of a left-handed pitcher on the mound. 4 starts, 23 and a third, 10.4% strikeout rate, 6.43 xFIP. Ouch. 7.2 barrel ball rate, 44.6% hard hit. Plays really well for sequential hitting, for power upside. If the Brewers come out and put 10 runs on this kid, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest. It's just difficult to get to them with any kind of unique combinations, particularly when we've got such a short pitching slate where everybody's going to be rostering the same pitchers along with these guys, because these guys are also cheap. So it just doesn't fit right for me for tournament play.
Yeah, it's so tough. And the other thing, too, is another thing that I'm going to be rehashing when I did the strategy show with Adam this morning. When there is a team that's this popular, I have no issue looking at the bottom of the order and saying, all right, who's a hitter that isn't popular that I can mix and match in there to reduce the ownership share of the team? Doesn't exist. The least popular hitter on this team on DK is Jace Peterson, 10.2% projected ownership. Everybody else is 15% or higher. That's a massive issue. I don't want to play, 30% of guys like Colton Wong, Avisel Garcia, Willie Adames, Christian Yelich. Cash game options, these guys are all terrific. But for tournament purposes, if you want to be overweight to this team, you have to have them in nearly a third of your lineup, because the field is rostering these guys over 25% of the time. So it's a number that, for me, honestly, with this many games, is going to be really difficult to get to. Something else that I'm going to bring up from this morning, we had a lot of people in YouTube chat who were convinced that we shouldn't even be talking about the game. There was no chance it was going to play. The weather looked terrible. We still need updates on it, but the weather is not something, to me, that is going to have me off this game at this point in time. Same thing I said this morning. We're looking at like 20 to 25% chance of rain. Could it be an issue? Yes, but I don't think it's the most likely scenario. So have you checked the weather at all for this?
I hadn't, but I'm jumping over to dark sky right now. Looks like 9 o'clock, maybe it'll break a block of rain, 9 o'clock local time. So it seems like they'll at least have like 2 hours of clean baseball. So maybe a late game delay or maybe a late game washout, I guess, but it's not something I would be sweating, I don't think, at this point.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing this morning also when I was looking at it, is like it could rain, but it looks like as of now, a lot of the rain is expected to come either the later innings or after the game ends. So as of now, it's not something that's really an inhibiting factor for me. The thing that's a bigger concern is that we have, like Willie Adames, 26.4% owned on DK. That's really to me what's causing my head to turn. But other than that, Milwaukee Brewers clearly a terrific spot. Load up on them in cash games. GPPs, if you want to mix some of them in as one-offs, I have no issue with that. But as a five-man stack, I'm already playing pretty popular pitchers. If you want to go play the Brewers and you want to play Lance Lynn, good for you. Lance Lynn could go out and score 40 points. The Brewers could score 12 runs, and you still might not even cash, considering the amount of ownership we have on those spots. So I'm going to be looking to differentiate off the Brewers. And the number one spot I'm looking to differentiate, do you want to answer for me? Because you already know what the answer is, I'm pretty sure.
Do they play in Texas? Do they happen to play in Texas? Do they happen to bang on trash cans and cheat from time to time? Could it be the Houston
Astros? The good team in Texas. So if the Texas Rangers have been cheating, they've been doing it the very wrong this entire time. But the Houston Astros, who I know you wrote about them today. You guys should also be checking out. Terry does a really good tournament strategy article that comes out every day. Basically, Terry takes no rest. Every once in a while, he might have something going on, but for the most part, Terry's on that, every day of the week. So check out Terry's article. Does a really good job of recapping overall some of the stuff that's coming up in his data, the players he wants to target. But tell me what you like about the Houston Astros today.
I love the fact that they're owned in single digits across the board on both sites. There's nobody on FanDuel. Doesn't look like anybody, at least as the last time I updated, over 5%. And similar story on DK. Kyle Tucker, highest owned player on the Astros at 4.3%. That's absurd. They're going up against Colby Allard. This is the best hitting team in baseball against both hands. They're going up against against lefties. 121 ISO. They create runs 21% better than average. Best in baseball. They strike out 18.3% of the time against lefties. That's the lowest mark in baseball. 179 ISO, 3.81% home run rate is only around average. So maybe they don't hit a ton of balls out of the park, but they're constantly creating runs. They create runs better than any other team in the league in this split. I love this spot for the Astros. I don't care how high priced they are. We will find ways to get there. And that's where some of those crappy pitches that we talked about on DK come in. But for the pricing on FanDuel in particular, they just pop. They really, really stand out. I'm not really sure why people aren't getting into them more on FanDuel because they're affordable. You can put this lineup together in pretty much any way you want. So I'm not really sure where the low ownership's coming from there, but I want to take advantage of it.
I thought it was going to change during the day. I mean, not for sure, but I thought there was a chance that like, hey, maybe we'll come on later in the day and it'll be like, hey, the Astros are in 10% of the field's lineups and everything's, on the up and up and they're owned properly. It's just not the case. Houston, 2.2% projected ownership on FanDuel with a 10.6% chance to be the top scoring team of the day. And then on DK, also woefully under-owned. So here's just something for comparison's sake. We just talked about the Milwaukee Brewers and why we'd want to be underweight to the field on them. We have the Astros today projected for a 10.3% chance on DraftKings to be the top scoring team of the day. 12.3% chance for the Brewers. So, all right, marginally higher for the Brewers, 2% when teams are, we're talking about 10% for the Astros. So the Brewers about 20% more likely to be the top scoring team on the slate, just doing some quick math here. However, ownership, the Brewers are more than 10x the ownership of the Astros. So we start to talk about leveraging and finding places to pivot. Give me the Houston Astros over the Milwaukee Brewers. That is my number one favorite stack of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can just go by the leverage number and look where they're ranked on the board for either site in the top stacks tool, and then just scan over to that leverage number. And it tells you everything that you need to know about why that's a good spot. And it's just a team that's absolutely loaded from top to bottom, too, with good hitting. We can, with apologies to Martin Maldonado in the 9-hole, Jose Altuve, Michael Brantley, Yuli Gurriel, Jordan Alvarez, Carlos Correa, Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker, Jake Myers, even Jake Myers at the end of the lineup there. That's an all-star team that you're getting at almost no ownership. So, yeah, it's a spectacular, spectacular spot here. I want to get to these guys a lot in this situation.
The most popular player projected right now, other than if we're taking pitchers out of the mix, just Framber Valdez is the most popular, but most popular hitter right now in DK, Kyle Tucker, 4%, not a single other hitter in the lineup, more than 2% projected ownership. This spot I want to get overweight to the field on. Colby Allard has not been particularly good this year. I just don't get it. I don't get why the Astros aren't massively popular today. So that is going to be the team that I prioritize most heavily. Now I'm going to ask you, Terry, because it's something that I'm going to bring up. Blitz in our YouTube chat said that based on your article, she did a Houston and Baltimore stack together. So now I'm going to ask you, Terry, do you still like the Orioles, and what is it about them that you like this morning?
I'm guessing that probably came more from the power index than from the written breakdowns because I actually wrote up the Rays on the other side of this one as the featured stack of the day. So I do a couple of stacks and then I give like the featured stack where I go through all the hitters that are in the projected lineup. But I do like the Orioles side of this one. They're going up against Michael Wacha, first of all, which is, not a spectacular pitcher, despite the fact that he's the guy pitching for Tyler's life today. 90 and a third innings, 21.3% strikeout rate for Wacha, 4.11 xFIP, a lot of league averages type stuff, but a 1.51 whip puts way too many guys on base, doesn't induce enough swinging strikes, doesn't throw enough strikes, too many barreled balls, way too much hard hit at 42.9%. Wacha is a targetable pitcher. There are some very nice power bats in that Orioles lineup, and that's probably where it came from, actually. Trey Mancini was my home run call of the day, so that's probably what picked it up and led to that stack. But they do rank out nicely in my power index there. Between Mountcastle, Santander, and Trey Mancini, we've got 3 guys over the magic number of 10 in my home run model, and then we've got a couple of the guys right on their heels. Cedric Mullins, DJ Stewart to round that out pretty nicely. I would not have a problem like bolting Jorge Mateo onto a stack from late in the lineup. I love his speed. He needs to be able to get on base to exploit it. Only a 305 on base doesn't really help us too much. But when he's on, he's just got afterburners. So I don't mind getting to that kid. Don't love the Ramon Urias, Pedro Severino, Kelvin Gutierrez part of it, but we can work with those guys if we need them.
Yeah, and to what you said about Baltimore, to me, this team is about appropriately owned right now. The one thing I will say about them, we like paying up for pitching today. The cheap pitching options suck. Who's cheap? The Baltimore Orioles. You can make a 5-man Orioles stack and get up to the pitchers we like Lance Lynn, Framber Valdez, Adam Wainwright. No real issue pairing any of those guys together, rostering the Orioles. So that's the one thing I'll say that's appealing about them. They're cheap. They have an easy matchup against Michael Wacha, favorable hitters park, but not really the highest of priority plays for me. However, I want to follow up, circle back, and ask you about the Tampa Bay Rays. Unfortunately, the ownership has come up a little bit from this morning. I think earlier in the day when we did this show, they were projected for like 4 or 5% projected ownership. It's come up to 8%. They're still a very positively leveraged team. It's a team I want to prioritize pretty heavily. We talked before about John Means, about maybe not knowing who he really is as a pitcher, considering it's been 2 halves of the season for him. You indicated you think that he's going to be more likely the bad version of John Means than the good version of John Means. But the Tampa Bay Rays do rate out pretty well in our top stacks tool. Under-owned, good chance to be a top-scoring team. So the Rays, how heavy are you going to be on them today?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be getting to them a decent amount. It might not be centered around the guys that one might expect coming out of this lineup, because most of the ownership that you're talking about is really centered on like 3 players in this lineup, and that's Randy Arozarena and Nelson Cruz up top, the 2 obvious names, both pulling around 20% on FanDuel, similar-ish numbers on DK. Everybody below them drops into the single digits until you get down to Jordan Luplow, and he's at 13% ownership because he's the dead minimum, hitting 7th in this lineup on the FanDuel slate. 3,000 on DK doesn't juice his ownership up, so he's in single digits on DK. So outside of the first 2 hitters, everybody's highly playable in low ownership terms on DK. And I like some of those guys through the middle here. I like Wander Franco. I'll take Yandy Diaz. I like Brandon Lau. I like him better against righties for sure, but I'll take him here. Manny Margot, I think, is a capable guy. Luplow's somewhat capable. I don't want to give him too much credit at 161, 317, 390 on the season, but despite the sub-Mendoza batting average, still on 98 WRC plus, so he's still capable. 7 home runs on the year. Francisco Mejia, Kevin Kiermaier, I can take or leave off the bottom of the lineup, but I think they do come together in low-owned and unique enough ways. You got a couple multi-position guys in here, so you can move them around a little bit. So I like the Rays. I want to get to them pretty heavily here, and the low ownership on those other guys enables you to roster some shares of Arozarena and Nelson Cruz in those stacks. So I like getting to them here.
Yeah, they're definitely a fairly high priority stack for me. Not quite as much as this morning, but still a team I definitely want to get to. And I've looked at some of the other positive leverage teams ahead of them. The Atlanta Braves, I get they have positive leverage, but also pretty expensive. I don't love the matchup, so I'm finding them a little difficult to get to. I do want to get to a question that we got from our guy, Eric Johnson. Always loyal in the YouTube channel. I don't know that we've had anybody watch more shows this year than Eric Johnson and Sean V. Always loyal supporters of the show, and we definitely appreciate you guys popping up, asking questions, and participating. Eric asked if we're going to be stacking the Dodgers again tonight. For me, here's the issue with the Dodgers, and it was an issue I had last night too, even though they've rated out as a positive leverage team. They are so expensive now, and especially for this slate where we're trying to prioritize paying up for pitching, it's so difficult to be like, all right, Mookie Betts, Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Trey Turner, Will Smith, Chris Taylor. These guys are all so expensive that if you want to make a 5-man stack of the Dodgers, you're paying everything. You're mortgaging the house. You're paying an arm and a leg. You're giving up everything to get to the Dodgers. And I just don't think there's cheap enough pitching plays from you to want to do it confidently. So the matchup against John Gray, I think there is upside there. The Dodgers offense is always going to have upside. But this team could legitimately score 10 runs and not be the optimal lineup just because if the high-end pitchers go off, it's not going to matter. So the Dodgers, I like the spot for them. But what are you doing with the Dodgers?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Maybe they're a little bit more, at least on DK in particular, they're a little bit more of like a secondary stack. Maybe this is where you're grabbing your three-mans from if you can, and you're working with like a Chris Taylor and a Cody Bellinger from late in the lineup, fairly low ownership, lower prices, and then one of the guys from the middle of the lineup, or if you're wrapping like Bellinger around to Trey Turner, if the lineup falls the way it's projected. I can see doing it that way and getting to them in like smaller shares. But you're right. I mean, the top 5 hitters in this lineup, the average DK salary is $54.60. So, I mean, they are very difficult to put together, and then forget about going to the 2 high-end pitchers that we've talked about. So, yeah, you're going to be rostering these guys along with, if you're going to the full 5-man, along with a lower-end second stack and some lower-end pitching. It's just difficult to do. They're a little bit more affordable on FanDuel, but they're getting more ownership over there. So, and that's why, because they're more affordable. So I don't love it. I do think that it's a targetable spot against John Gray. Although for the season, a couple things since we kind of poo-pooed him as a pitcher, 23.2% strikeout rate is league average-ish, as is his 4.12 xFIP. That's fine. 5.7% barrel ball rate is actually pretty good. 37.4% hard hit is all right. So he's not terrible. 8.3 degree average launch angle, so he keeps the ball down fairly well. It's cutting into the Dodgers' home run marks in my model a little bit. So I don't necessarily think that the Dodgers have like explosive upside in this spot. Could they absolutely come out and score 10 runs through sequential hitting and all of that? Absolutely. Like you said, there's certainly a chance of that. Excellent offense going up against a mediocre pitcher. I just think there's enough here to make me kind of shy away from it at those prices. If they were cheaper, it would be a home run spot, but they'd also be higher owned.
Yeah, and that's going to be the issue I think we have with the Dodgers for a lot of the season. If there are slates where there are cheaper pitchers I like, sure, I'm going to get to it. But realistically, what is the pitching? What do the pitching options look like in a Dodgers stack today? But what are we going to? David Price and John Means, David Price and Michael Wacha. It's really hard to find 2 cheaper pitchers that I really like today. So that's really the inhibiting factor that's going to prevent me from getting to them. So to me, that kind of is where I'm at with them. Obviously, it's the Dodgers. They have a lot of upside, but too expensive, more than I want to pay. In terms of other stacks, Terry, what's a team that we have not yet mentioned that you do like quite a bit today?
So let's see, just looking down the DK top stacks tool a little bit. I mean, a team up near the top that is getting slightly positive leverage will probably go off owned around where they should. The Padres, always an interesting club to roster. It's another one of those teams where it's just when you can get to these teams that are just good baseball teams, good lineups in at least decent situations at reasonable ownership. I think there are enough ways to put them together going up against Jose Suarez here where they're at least interesting. Now, you're talking about a team where on every slate, basically, Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado are drawing the lion's share of this team's ownership. So now you're talking about threading together some of the Jake Cronenworths, Tommy Phams, Austin Nolas, Will Myerses of the world. It's not necessarily the best go-to spot for me. And then the back end of it, you get Ha-Seong Kim in there in the projected, Adam Frazier, Jake Marisnick. I'm not sure if the confirmed lineup for this one's dropped yet, but I don't love the back end of the lineup there. But based on where they're getting owned, based on what the prices are on some of these hitters, I think you can get to them for the spot. So it's not my favorite one, but out of the top-ranked teams that have a little bit of positive leverage, they make some sense. Taking a look down the board for leverage spots, I think the Cards probably make a little bit of sense again. Just a team with some home run upside and a team that I'm happy to get to. They're never really that expensive. I'm just jumping over to the DK pricing. So again, it's another one team with like 2 all-stars that get priced up a little bit in Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado. Both those guys not actually performing up to snuff compared to who they've been over time. But then Tommy Edman, Tyler O'Neill, both fairly priced, both reasonably owned. The back end of the lineup with Dylan Carlson, Edmund Sosa, Harrison Bader. I like that better than a final 3 in a lot of these other lineups. Yadi Molina, kind of a clunker in the 5 spot these days, but he's playable as a DK catcher. So I think the Cards are in play.
I'm going to try to sell you. I'm not going to try to sell you that hard. I'm going to tell you a team that I kind of like for contrarian purposes, a little more so as one-offs. What do you make of the Washington Nationals today? We've already said that Marcus Strowman as a pitcher is picking up way more ownership than we think he should. And it's not to say that there's a massive amount of upside in the Washington Nationals. Their offense is absolutely terrible. More so looking to like Juan Soto as a one-off in lineups without Marcus Strowman. Maybe Josh Bell as a one-off in lineups without Marcus Strowman in them. I just want to refresh our top pitchers tool to see like what are we looking at in terms of ownership on Strowman, if that's changed at all. If we get into lock and Strowman remains in about 50% of the field's lineups, I want to play some of these Nationals hitters as one-offs. As 5-man stack, maybe a couple of them here or there, but only if you're playing 150 lineups. But Juan Soto, 1% ownership. Considering all the ownership going to Strowman, how do you feel about getting to some of these Nationals players for that reason?
Yeah, I'll take Juan Soto any day of the week. He's one of the best hitters in baseball for my money, so I love that kid. I'll happily roster him here at under 1%, 4,400 on FanDuel, 1%, 5,400 on DK. Sign me up for that. No problem. I don't care who the opposing pitcher is or what the situation around him is. He's spectacular. I do like Josh Bell. I think he's a good hitter. 3,600 is too cheap for him on DraftKings, 35 too cheap for him on FanDuel. So the two of those guys are, like you said, the best two hitters and the two go-to guys here. If you're going to roster him as a stack, I prefer it as one-offs, and it would be focused around those guys, I think. And then maybe I'm throwing like a couple spots of like a Lane Thomas, maybe a Carter Kaboom for all his disappointment so far. It's not the greatest team to stack up, though. So if I'm stacking it, it would probably be like a Thomas. I don't really want Alcides Escobar, but the second spot in the lineup kind of dictates it, as does the price. But you could skip him, maybe go Thomas, Soto, Bell, Yadiel Hernandez, and Carter Kaboom. You're getting a completely unowned stack. Three of those guys cost $2,000 or $2,100, so you're not spending a lot here. So it's another spot where you'll be able to roster your expensive pitchers, and you're attacking a good portion of the field in that Strowman ownership. So from that perspective, I do kind of like that. I think it's at least an interesting and a sharp GPP call for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, more so it's going to be on, and by the way, updated Strowman, more ownership going to him now than when we started the show. So it is gone the other way. Strowman is now up to 44.5% on DK, just an absurd number in my opinion. But considering that's going to be the number, if that's the case, Juan Soto is actually going to be one of my favorite one-offs on the slate. I'm going to be way underweight to the field on Strowman. That's going to hinge on that being successful. I'm going to need either the Nationals to not strike out, which, that could happen, or they score a couple of runs against Strowman. And I think the way that it's most likely to happen is via Juan Soto. So that is something that I'm going to want to look at. One other stack here that I want to bring up is we've got a few minutes left here, guys. If you have any questions, fire those in. We can start answering them. The Chicago White Sox yesterday scored a bazillion runs. They put up, I think they finished with 17 runs. It was the White Sox Cubs Chicago matchup. Game finishes being scored 17-10. We've got a whole bunch of ownership going to Lance Lynn. I think that's warranted. I understand why people are on the White Sox in a pretty big way, but I'm kind of looking to be underweight to the field despite what happened yesterday. I think there's a little bit of recency bias that's driving the ownership a little bit too much today.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. They project very well for me. The top 5 hitters all with pretty solid marks here, but they're not like exploding through the roof. They're not exploding through the top of my home run model. A couple guys over the 10 mark in Jose Abreu and Eloy Jimenez in there. They get Yasmani Grandal back in this lineup. Spectacular on base guy, 23.8% walk percentage on this season. That's absurd. He's on base all the time, even though he's a 203 hitter. He's got a 394 on base percentage and a 278 ISO on the season, 16 home runs in 252 plate appearances. I'm a big Yasmani Grandal fan. Brian Goodwin, Andrew Vaughn. There's a lot of talent in this lineup. But yeah, I'm with you. The ownership is hefty. So it's a spot where I'm going to be under the field just based on that. And it's regardless of what happened yesterday almost. But there are spots in this lineup, like Timmy Anderson on the FanDuel slate, 5% owned. I'll take that. Jose Abreu, single digits. I'll take that. So maybe I'm getting to them in some one-offs. Maybe I'm stacking a couple in like a 3-man stack of the lower owned guys and just trying to thread it together that way. I'm not looking to actively avoid it necessarily where I'm like going to take them out of my pool or anything like that. I think it's too good a spot going up against Alec Mills here, but it would definitely come out through my process, through my model and everything as underneath where the field is projected for these guys.
Yeah, and they're not as egregiously overowned as a team like, say, the Minnesota Twins. That's another very popular stack we have not talked about yet. I don't understand why the field is getting to Minnesota at this kind of rate. Adrian Hauser, not to say that he's a great individual pitcher. However, actually, you know what's really driving the ownership? It's that Byron Buxton's price is just wrong on DK. So I
hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, so 2,800 for Byron Buxton. He has been confirmed to the lineup. He's picking up 34.6% ownership. That aside, there are some really popular hitters in this lineup. Josh Donaldson, because he's cheap, he's picking up ownership in the team. Same goes for Luis Arraez. But what are you going to be doing with Byron Buxton, that kind of salary he has, and all that ownership going to him? That he might be the most popular individual hitter of the year on DK for a slate this size.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to get different on DK if you just take Marcus Strowman and Byron Buxton out of your player pool entirely and just run your crunch. You're going to be operating differently than a lot of people. I want no part of a hitter that's owned 34%. I mean, I'll take some shares of them, but it's not going to be anything approaching that kind of a stratosphere. I'll be way, way under, and most of it would probably be tied up in stacks if I'm doing it. I prefer some of the other hitters in this lineup. Like I'll take a 4.4% on Max Kepler hitting from the left side of the plate against Adrian Hauser for $4,000 on DK and $3,000 on FanDuel. I'll take him out of this lineup. Donaldson, obviously a spectacular power hitter, 3,400 on FanDuel, only 5% ownership. You can get to him over there. Jorge Polanco as well, reasonable ownership marks, 3,900. I can get to him. Luis Arias, I don't love. Good leadoff man, good stick, 306, 374, 394. A .088 ISO, creates runs 13% better than average, just doesn't do a lot on his own. Good correlation play, needs to get himself on base so that the other guys drive him in. That's why it costs 2,300 on the FanDuel slate, 2,800 on DK. So he's a viable part of stacks, but there are other hitters that I prefer to get to. So he's one that I tend to skip over more often than a lot of other leadoff hitters when I'm stacking teams.
All right, I want to hit on a question from Arcathelza, who, by the way, I feel bad. He felt left out. Arcathelza is always watching the baseball shows, and yeah. I didn't group him in with Eric and Sean V before when I said the people who count most likely. Now, Arcathelza, number one in basketball. Nobody asks more questions, more involved in our basketball shows for sure. I could be wrong. I feel like just off the top of my head, Sean V and Eric Johnson have asked a little more baseball questions. But for sure, Arcathelza always in there, always asking questions. And he did ask us, why don't I like the Angels today? I just kind of think they're a neutral stack. Obviously, as a one-off, Shohei Ohtani is really, really strong, but it's a pretty weak lineup overall. About fair ownership. I don't have an issue with them, but it's not anything that stands out to me in either direction.
Yeah, not one that's really popping up for me. The three obvious names project fairly well with Ohtani, Upton, and Walsh. That said, at least Upton on FanDuel is getting 12% ownership because he's priced at 2,700. Probably a misprice for Justin Upton with his power upside. 27 on the DK slate, getting 15% ownership. Outside of him, nobody drawing all that much ownership. So it's a team that I would probably land on through process. I would have some shares of, but it's not one I'm going out of my way for. If I come in, double the field, it would be easy enough to do and it wouldn't surprise me, but it's not because I'm really, really pushing to get to the spot. That said, Brian Weathers, perfectly attackable pitcher, 8.4% barrel ball rate, 43.6% hard hit on the season, 10.8 degree average launch angle. So the ball's in the air a little bit, only a 17.9% strikeout rate and a 7.6% walk. So that brings him way down towards zero in the BBB minus K, which is the sequential hitting and run creation metric that I have. So I like the spot for the Angels. It's just not one that really explodes for me. Sneaky hitter at the back end of the lineup, Joe Dell, a lot of power in his bat. It'll get here one day. Eventually he'll start hitting home runs.
All right, so let's wrap up with this because you're going to like this. I like it at least anyway. Home run picks. The number one player, the best bet of the day in our MLB player prop model over at Awesemo, Juan Soto, plus 625 to home. Earlier in the day, he was plus 650. He can now be found at plus 625. The second best home run bet of the day, Josh Bell at plus 625. So the home run player prop model here, like in some of these Nationals guys, not that they're the most likely players to homer on the slate, but kind of correlating to how they're being viewed in DFS. Everybody's just kind of writing off the Nationals, loading up on Marcus Strowman. The books also, plus 625, both Soto and Bell to homers. Those look like long odds. What do you think about that?
I tell you what, I like that. I mean, we're talking about the two right guys in that lineup for starters. But just looking back over to the Nationals real quick, Soto, 54.6% hard hit on the season with a 13.1% barrel rate. Bell, 50.5% hard hit, 9.4% barrel rate. Both of them have 21 homers in 491 plate appearances for Soto, 415 for Bell, plus 200 ISOs. Both significant power hitters. So I like both of those spots. And it's not like Strowman is a spectacular pitcher. He keeps the ball down a little bit, 6.9% barrel rate, 7.2 degree average launch angle. But there's plenty of hard hit here, 42.9% hard hit. So I think they've got a decent chance.
All right. And, here's what I think we are. Here's a good thing to close on, because I know the answer to this question. Eric Johnson asked, when are September call-ups? Buddy. By definition, September. When are the September call-ups? They're in September. That is going to do it for Terry and I. Good luck today, guys. By the way, if you're looking for the NFL preseason show, it is not going to be happening today. There was apparently a little bit of an internet hiccup somewhere. But all the more, there's still going to be a lot of football content coming down the road on this YouTube channel. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and everybody, good luck tonight.